Escort her out, and make sure she understands she's never setting foot in this building again. Marcus said it calmly, confidently, in front of the entire board. His wife stood at the far end of the table, hands folded, saying nothing. Not because she had nothing to say, but because the moment he finished speaking, she realized she didn't need to. The boardroom sat on the 32nd floor, and on a clear morning, you could see the whole city from up there. The river catching early light, the old bridges going russet and gold, the cluster of glass towers that had been rising for the last decade like something the city had been waiting its whole life to exhale. Lorraine had stood at that window more times than she could count. She knew the view the way you know the layout of a house you grew up in, without having to look, without having to think about where anything was. She knew which buildings had gone up in which order, which ones were still struggling to fill their floors 2 years after opening, which developer had overextended himself on the east side and quietly sold at a significant loss 2 winters ago. She knew all of it because she had watched it happen from this exact window, from the beginning. Back when the office had no furniture and the glass still had its protective film, and when she raised her voice to give instructions, it echoed off the bare walls and came back to her. That was before Marcus. The morning of the board meeting, she woke before her alarm. It was a Tuesday in March, cold and low and gray, the kind of morning that feels like the city is still deciding what kind of day it's going to be. She did not reach for her phone right away, which was unusual. She was normally reading messages before both feet hit the floor, scrolling before she'd fully crossed from sleep to wakefulness. Instead, she stood at the kitchen window with a cup of coffee she let go cold, watching the neighborhood come awake below. A woman jogging in a yellow jacket, her breath making small clouds. A delivery truck sitting at the corner with its hazard lights blinking orange in the gray. A man in a long coat arguing quietly and intently with someone on the other end of a phone, gesturing at the air like it owed him something. Small, ordinary things. She watched them with the particular close attention you give to small things, when your mind is holding something heavy and needs something light to set against it. Marcus had already left. His side of the bed was made with the corners squared, the pillows set precisely, the way he had done it every morning for 11 years. He was particular about small details, the bed, the dishes rinsed and stacked in a specific order, his shoes aligned at the closet door. She had loved that about him in the beginning. It had seemed like evidence of a careful man, a man who paid real attention to the world immediately around him. She was not sure anymore whether she still found it comforting or whether it had, over the years, become one of those things you register so continuously that it stops carrying any meaning, just a habit that outlasted whatever feeling had produced it. She got dressed without hurrying, a gray blazer, dark slacks, simple shoes, nothing that announced anything. She had never been a woman who needed her clothing to speak for her. That had always struck her as an exhausting way to live, the performance of power through appearance, the armor that requires constant maintenance. Her mother had dressed plainly her entire life and walked into every room like she had already decided what was going to happen in it. Lorraine had tried to inherit that quality. Most days, she felt like she had. At her collarbone, on a thin silver chain, a small brass key. Old, worn in a specific way. Not from neglect, but from years of being handled. The bow smoothed where a thumb had rubbed it down, the teeth softened. The whole thing carrying the particular warmth of something that has lived close to a human body for a long time. She didn't think about putting it on in the mornings. She never did anymore. It was simply there, the way certain things become part of you, not through any act of decision, but through the long accumulation of days. There was one more thing she did before she left the house. She stood in the doorway of the study, Marcus's study, technically, though it had been hers before it was his, and looked at the bookshelf along the far wall. In the middle of the second shelf, between a thick book on organizational behavior that Marcus had bought and never read, and a worn copy of a novel she had read 4 times, there was a framed photograph. The two of them, early in the marriage, at a company event, both laughing at something happening outside the frame. She was wearing the key in the photo, visible at her collarbone, catching the light. He had his hand at the small of her back. She looked at it for a long moment, not out of sentiment exactly, more like she was checking something, confirming the original before a long day of encountering what it had become. Her phone had a message from her attorney. She read it standing in the kitchen while her coffee cooled, read it twice, set the phone face down on the counter without responding. She finished getting ready. She drove herself to the meeting that her husband had spent 3 weeks preparing to use against her. The lobby had terrazzo floors she'd selected with an architect named Warren over 3 slow, careful weeks. He wore the same gray blazer every meeting and had an eye for materials that was close to devotion, the kind of focus you only see in people who genuinely love their work and have long since stopped apologizing for how seriously they take it. The reception desk was a single, unbroken slab of black walnut, warm and solid, grounding the whole space the way only the right material in exactly the right place can. Cora, who had been at that desk nearly 2 years, looked up when Lorraine came through the revolving door and smiled with about 10% too much careful. The kind of careful that tells you someone's been told something and is working to act as though they haven't. Lorraine smiled back the way you smile at a thing you've decided not to address and took the elevator up. On the 32nd floor, the conference room was filling when she arrived. She could see through the glass walls before she pushed the door open. 8 people already seated. Marcus at the head of the long mahogany table, the presentation already live on the screen. He was mid-sentence. She stood at the glass for just a moment, reading the room the way she always did before she walked into any situation. Who was engaged? Who was somewhere else in their head? Who was managing their expression with a deliberateness that told you they already knew something was wrong? Theodore, 68, one of the 3 original investors who had written checks before there was anything to look at except her business plan and the quality of her answers under pressure, was looking at his notepad. Not writing, just looking at it. The way you look at something when your eyes need somewhere to be that isn't the thing you can't look at directly. Gloria sat to the left of center, 72 years old, the kind of sharp that people consistently underestimated because she didn't perform it. She just was it, quietly and continuously, until the moment she needed to use it, at which point the person on the receiving end understood immediately that they had been making a mistake. Gloria was the only one watching the door when Lorraine came through it. She walked to the far end of the table and sat directly opposite Marcus. He did not stop speaking. He laid it all out with a thoroughness she could genuinely respect, even now. Financial irregularities detected across 14 months, a pattern of transfers characterized as unauthorized. He had the dates, the account codes, the specific amounts in red on the screen. His CFO, Patrick, a lean and careful man who Lorraine had met exactly twice in 18 months, sat to Marcus's right with an open folder and a readiness that told her he had rehearsed his part. Outside counsel had reviewed the findings. The auditors had confirmed them. The whole architecture of accusation was carefully built. He was a thorough man. Whatever else she felt about the morning, she gave him that. "We've had this reviewed at every level," Marcus said, his voice carrying the specific steadiness of a person who has practiced for a difficult scene. "The conclusion is consistent, which is why—" He paused, making a visible decision. "Lorraine, I'm going to ask you to step outside while the board deliberates." "I'd prefer to stay," she said, pleasantly. "That's not a preference I'm offering." The security guards appeared at the door, the way people do when they've been told to wait nearby and listen for a signal. Two men in building uniforms, doing their best to look neutral about an uncomfortable situation. She looked at them, looked at Marcus, looked at her own hands folded on the table. The brass key sat small and cool against her skin beneath the blazer. "5 minutes," she said. "Give me 5 minutes." "Lorraine!" "Let her speak." Gloria's voice, quiet as a line drawn in the ground. Marcus looked at Gloria. Something moved through his face that he suppressed before it finished. He sat back. "5 minutes," he said. She had met Marcus at an industry conference 9 years ago. He was 41, recently divorced, working as a senior vice president at a logistics company that had nothing to do with her world. What he had was something she recognized immediately. He understood systems. He could look at a complex operational structure and explain it back to you in plain language without losing any of the meaning. He was usually right. He asked good questions and remembered the answers. The first time she showed him what she was building, he had asked 15 questions, and not one of them was the kind you ask to be polite. He was actually interested in how the structure held together, what the vulnerabilities were, how she was managing them. That conversation had gone 3 hours in a hotel bar, and she had driven home that night, thinking she hadn't talked like that with anyone in a long time. They married 2 years after they met. He came to work with her, her suggestion, his agreement. He brought things she didn't have. His strength was operations and scaling, the architecture of a business in motion. She was the builder, the long strategist, the person who saw the shape of the thing decades out. He was the person who figured out how to keep the engine running while the car was already moving. For 3 or 4 years, it had been a genuine partnership. She would say that honestly, even now, even after this morning. The shift came not as a single thing, but as a collection of small things that could each be individually explained away. He started introducing himself differently at events, not with a lie exactly, but with a framing that had quietly moved him toward the center of a story that had another center. He started being the one who spoke first in board meetings while she prepared the materials. He started saying, "We built this in a way where we was doing a lot of heavy lifting without being technically untrue." She watched this happen and told herself different things at different points, that it didn't matter, that she preferred operating from the background, that credit is a small currency. Her sister Denise had a different read. Denise was 3 years older, worked as a high school principal on the city's east side, and had the particular directness of someone who spent all day managing 17-year-olds and had no patience left for indirectness by the time she got home. She had said to Lorraine, over dinner, about 4 years into the marriage, "He's rewriting the history of the company in real time, and you're letting him." Lorraine had been irritated by that, had thought about it for weeks, had decided Denise was applying a framework that didn't quite fit. Her mother, who had been a quiet and extraordinarily patient woman, had told her once, "Lorraine, there's a difference between patience and avoidance. One of them is a virtue, the other just feels like one. She thought about that in the parking garage later, about the particular stubbornness that had led her to keep having the conversation with herself instead of having it with Marcus. There had been moments when the opening was right there. She hadn't stepped through it. She had told herself she was choosing the long view. Maybe she had been. Maybe not entirely. She did not defend herself. Not once. That was what the people in that room would carry with them. That she never said, "I didn't do this." Never protested, never looked hurt, never reached for the righteous anger that would have been entirely earned. She asked questions instead. She asked Patrick which account the transfers had been authorized from. He opened his folder, read out the account number, a subsidiary account, sitting under a holding company, sitting under a parent entity at the top. She thanked him. Could he read the full legal name of the parent entity? He read it. And after he finished, there was a pause. The specific pause of something failing to process the way a system expects it to. And then, who were the authorized signatories on that holding company? Patrick looked at his screen, then at Marcus, then back at his screen, longer. There's one signatory listed. One name, she said. And that name is? The name Patrick read was Lorraine's, not Lorraine and Marcus. Not a shared authorization, not a board committee, not a dual signature arrangement. One name, hers, only hers. Because 7 years ago, when they restructured the holding company, Marcus had proposed it, and his structural reasoning was sound. It was genuinely good thinking. She was the one who signed the formation documents. She was always the one who signed the founding documents. She had built this company the way she had built every serious thing in her life, in her own name, with her own authority, because that was the only way she knew how to build something real. And she had never changed the structure because she had never had a reason to. No one had ever asked her to. It was simply the truth of what she owned. The transfers were authorized by the one person with authority to authorize them, into accounts that belonged entirely and legally to her. The particular quality of silence that followed was unlike the usual silence of a boardroom. Board meetings had a lot of silence in them. Strategic silence, waiting silence, the silence of people thinking about what they want to say next. This was different. This was the silence of a room full of people separately computing the implications of the same thing, and the computing taking a moment. Cortez got there first. She saw it in how his pen stilled. Theodore arrived next, his expression shifting into something that wasn't surprise exactly, more like confirmation of a suspicion he hadn't let himself form into words. Gloria, who had already known, simply watched the others arrive and said nothing. Marcus arrived last. Not because he was slower, it was because he had the furthest to travel. Lorraine let the silence sit, because some truths need their full weight before you move past them. And moving past them too fast is its own kind of dishonesty. I wasn't stealing, she said, quietly, to the table, to no one person specifically. I was managing the company's finances, the way I have been since before most of you came into this picture. She reached into her bag and placed a document on the table and slid it down the center, past water glasses and folded hands, until it stopped in front of Marcus. He picked it up. There are moments when the world reorganizes itself. When what you learn doesn't just update what you know, but changes the ground everything was standing on. Everyone in that room watched this happen to Marcus, and it was strange and uncomfortable to witness, even for the people who felt no particular sympathy for him. He was not reading slowly because the language was difficult. He was a fast reader. She had watched him absorb dense contracts in minutes, flagging the problems, remembering the numbers. He was slowing himself down because his brain was doing something else while his eyes moved across the page. Rebuilding a map of a territory that had just turned out to be nothing like what he'd been navigating. The document was the full ownership structure, current and certified. Her name appeared in 12 places, the holding company, the parent entity above it, her direct stake alongside the structural majority. The numbers were clear. There was no version of the document that allowed for a different interpretation. He put it on the table. He looked up. She was watching him, and she looked tired. Not angry, not triumphant, not vindicated. Tired in the specific way of someone who has been carrying something very heavy for a very long time, and has finally, this morning, put it down, feeling both the relief and the ache of it simultaneously. He opened his mouth. Nothing came out. She spoke first, kept her voice low enough that the room had to be completely still to hear her. "I didn't come here to embarrass you. I want you to hear that clearly." She meant it. "I came because you were about to make a decision that couldn't be taken back. The kind that follows a person, that follows a company." She meant the police. 2 officers from the city's commercial crimes unit had been waiting in the lobby for 20 minutes. Marcus had made that call the previous afternoon, once Patrick's report was finalized. He had expected to walk a thief out of the building she had built, on camera, past everyone who worked there. Gloria looked at the young woman beside her and said something in a low voice. The woman got up without a word and left. The security guards at the door found somewhere else to look. "I had documentation," Marcus said. His voice was flat. He was looking for solid ground and finding none. "I know what you had. No edge in it." Patrick's team was thorough. Every number they showed this board is accurate. Every transfer happened exactly when they said it did. She paused. The only question that didn't get asked was whether they were authorized, and that question has a very clear answer. He looked at the document again. At her. Something broke behind his eyes. Not visibly, not in a way anyone could point at, but it was there. The moment when the story a person has been telling themselves about their own life stops being available. "Whatever you believed was happening," she said, and her voice was consistent, level, genuinely not cruel. "You should have come to me first, before any of this, before the lawyers, before Patrick's report, before those calls." She looked at him directly. 11 years, Marcus, and you didn't think once to wonder if you were missing something." He said nothing. She let that be what it was. "The police can go home," she said, to the room broadly. She looked briefly at Gloria when she said it. "No charges, no removal. The meeting is adjourned." She picked up her bag. "I'll be in touch with each of you individually about how we move forward." People moved. Carefully. The particular careful of people who understand that something has broken, and they do not want to be the one who steps wrong. He stayed in his chair. She stayed too. Theodore paused in the doorway with one hand on the frame, looked back at Lorraine with an expression hovering between acknowledgement and apology, without fully committing to either. And then he was gone. She put things back in her bag, methodical. Her mother had always said she came into the world organized. "How long did you know?" he asked, quietly. A real question from a man trying to locate himself in a story he had misunderstood. She looked at him. "I had my suspicions for a while. Not one specific moment. More like a pattern I noticed over time." She thought about how to be accurate. "The way you started framing certain things in board meetings. Some conversations with Patrick I happened to hear. You talked about decisions like the authority came from the role rather than the ownership, like the title was where the power lived. He sat with that. And you didn't correct it. No, why not? She was quiet for a moment, not managing the question, actually thinking. Because correcting it would have forced us both to see clearly what we were dealing with. And I wanted to hold on to the version of you I had in my head for a little longer. She paused. That's on me, I know that. He pressed his hands flat on the table, stared at the grain of the mahogany. I genuinely believed, he started, stopped, started differently. When Patrick showed me those transfers, I was certain. I know you were, she said. That's the part that's hard. Not that you made an error, that you were that certain and still didn't come to me first. That landed. She watched it land. He didn't try to deflect it. They sat in silence for a while, long enough to feel it. What happens now? He asked. The board structure gets formally documented. All authority, on paper, clear. That happens this week. She stood. The rest, I'm not answering today. She walked toward the door. Lorraine. She stopped. The key. His voice had changed, gone smaller. You wore it today. You always wear it. Her hand moved to her collarbone without her deciding to, fingers finding the chain. She had assumed for years that it was invisible to him, just a piece of jewelry, just a detail he'd registered and filed under irrelevant. But he knew what it was. He had always known. She didn't answer. She walked out. Gloria was in the hall, leaning against the wall with her arms folded, having stopped pretending to be doing anything else. When Lorraine came through the door, they fell into step together toward the elevator, neither of them deciding to. You knew, Lorraine said. I knew enough, Gloria said. I've been on your cap table since year 2. I've seen my name on those documents next to yours from the beginning. When Patrick started compiling that report and Marcus started making calls, I could see where it was going. You could have told me. I could have. No defensiveness. But that would have given you the option to cut it short before it ran its course. And I didn't think that was what you needed. Lorraine looked at her. You needed to see the whole shape of it, Gloria said. Not a summary. The whole thing. Otherwise, you'd have spent years wondering how far he would have actually gone. The elevator came. They stepped in together. Are you all right? Gloria asked once the doors closed. The bored voice was gone, something older in its place. I will be. That's not the same thing. No, Lorraine said. It's not. They rode down in the kind of silence that doesn't need filling. In the lobby, at the revolving doors, Gloria put a hand briefly on Lorraine's arm. Just a moment, just contact, the kind that means more than words, and both of them knew it. And then they went out into the cold morning in different directions. She sat in her car in the parking garage for a while. Engine off, not crying, not scrolling, just sitting in the dim cool, in the smell of exhaust and concrete that she had always privately associated with in-between. The particular atmosphere of not yet, of being between what you were and what you were going to be next. Her phone rang. Denise. She answered on the second ring. How'd it go? Denise's voice was alert. She'd been waiting. Fine, Lorraine said. It went fine. A beat. That's it? Fine? I'm in a parking garage. Then come here. I'll make food. You can sit in my kitchen and be fine at me, and it's still better than being fine at a concrete wall. Lorraine almost laughed. I have calls to make. So, make them, then come. Denise's voice dropped. Are you actually okay? Not fine, actually. She looked through the windshield at the wall in front of her. Years ago, someone had written something on it in marker, a name, probably, or something someone had felt the need to record. And it had been painted over, but the ghost of the letters was still there under the gray if you looked. She'd noticed it every time she parked in this space, never been able to make out what it said. "I'm okay," she said. "I just need a minute to put things back where they go." "Take your minute, then come. I mean it." She sat there after she hung up, not quite ready to start the car. Her mind wasn't directly on Marcus. It was circling him, the way water circles a drain without falling in. 11 years. She could trace it like a geologist reads rock layers. The beginning, the real partnership of the first years, the slow and nearly imperceptible shift, and then the long middle period when she had been telling herself that what was occurring was fine, was acceptable, was perhaps even her own preference. And Denise had told her twice that she was wrong about that. Had told her directly, without softening the corners, the way Denise told you everything. She unclasped the chain and held the key in her palm. So small. The kind of thing that could get lost in a coat pocket and turn up 3 months later without you having worried about it. She had driven across town with it in her fist the night she signed the first lease, let herself into her apartment in the dark, and stood in the living room and held it and understood for the first time in her gut what she had been understanding intellectually for months, that this was real, that she was actually going to try. She had been 29. She had borrowed half the deposit from her mother. Her mother had handed it to her without a single question, just with that look, the one that meant, "I see what this is, and I believe in it." Lorraine had paid it back in 14 months. She had counted every one of them. She put it on a chain the morning after the signing, had worn it every day since, as an anchor, something that weighed almost nothing and meant almost everything. This was what $12 billion looked like in her mind, not a number. This, the worn place on the brass, the morning in an empty office, the original cost of the first locked door and the courage to believe, before any evidence existed, that something worth building was on the other side of it. She closed her hand around the key, then she clasped it back on, started the car, and made her calls. The restructuring took 6 weeks. No press release, no announcement, nothing that invited outside interpretation. She handled it directly, without theater, with the specific consistency of a person who understood that how you do things is often more important than what you do. Marcus's authority was formally and specifically documented for the first time. His scope defined in writing, on file, his title remaining, but his operational boundaries made explicit in a way they had never been before. She had considered removing him entirely, had sat with that option for several days, turning it over honestly, and concluded that what she actually wanted was something more difficult and more deliberate than a clean break. She wanted accountability without erasure. She wanted him to show up every day inside an accurate picture of what he was working within. Whether that was wisdom or its own kind of controlled consequence, she acknowledged to herself, without romanticizing it, that it was probably both. Their marriage was a separate question that lived in a different part of her. Some things need to be carried privately before they become conversations, and she had learned the cost of rushing that. Patrick resigned 4 days after the board meeting. She accepted it without comment and began looking for his replacement. Cortez called personally to apologize. A real one, specific and uncomfortable, not the kind people offer to manage their own discomfort. and she gave him full credit for it. Theodore stopped by one afternoon and stood in her open doorway with his coat still on. Said, "I should have asked more questions a long time ago." She told him she appreciated that. He nodded. He left. Small accountings. Not dramatic. Just honest. She was at her desk the following Monday morning when her assistant tapped on the open door and said Marcus was holding. Lorraine looked out the window for a moment. The city going about itself, enormous and indifferent, and going on. The river catching light. A plane tracking silently through a gray patch of sky. She thought about what Gloria had said in the hall. You needed him to go all the way, so you'd know exactly what you were dealing with. She had thought about that a lot in the days since. Whether she had been, in some part of herself she hadn't fully accessed, waiting. Whether the choice to keep the ownership structured in her name alone, unchanged, year after year, without considering the question, was only inertia or also something else. Some part of her setting a record straight in the only language available. She didn't arrive at a clean answer. She wasn't certain she needed one. "Tell him I'll call him back this afternoon," she said. "I'm in the middle of something." She was. She was always in the middle of something. That had been the whole point of all of it. Not the boardroom, not the document, not the number. The being in the middle of something that was larger than any single morning. The work that kept going regardless of everything else. The company that would outlast every version of every story told about it. She reached up and touched the key at her collarbone, briefly, without quite deciding to. Then she went back to work. If this story stayed with you, if something about the way Lorraine moved through that room hit different, I want to know what moment got you. Drop it in the comments. Was it the boardroom? The parking garage? The key? Tell me what you felt when it landed. And if you haven't subscribed yet, this is the sign. We don't do loud on this channel. We do real, the quiet stories. The ones where the most powerful thing a person does is also the smallest. New story dropping soon. We'll see you there.